Muhammad Ali stood on the stage, his voice booming through the crowded hall. He was in the middle of one of his speeches, the kind that always grabbed everyone's attention, full of fire and conviction. The air was thick with expectation, every word hanging in the balance as he spoke. People leaned forward, some nodding, some with expressions that showed they didn't quite agree but were listening anyway. He was in his element, a force of nature, commanding the room with every gesture. Then his eyes caught something in the front row, a soldier, sitting in a wheelchair, scarred in a way that spoke of unimaginable battles. The soldier's uniform was crisp, but his body told a different story. He looked up at Ali, his face a mix of respect and something else, something deeply personal. Slowly, with great effort, the soldier began to raise his hand. It was a struggle, a visible tremor running through his arm, but he was trying to salute. Ali's voice, which had been so loud and clear just moments before, faded. He didn't stop speaking abruptly, but the volume dropped, the words trailing off like a distant echo. The change was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but it was there. He watched the soldier, really watched him, as the hand slowly came up. Around the room, a different kind of tension started to build. It wasn't about the soldier directly, but about Ali himself. Many in that audience remembered his strong stand against the war, his refusal to serve. For some, it was a point of pride. For others, a deep betrayal. You could feel the unspoken judgments, the silent arguments playing out in people's minds. There were whispers, quick glances exchanged between rows. Ali's anti-war stance had made him a hero to some, a villain to others. And in that moment, with the soldier struggling to salute, all those old feelings seemed to bubble up to the surface. Ali, usually so defiant, so ready for a fight, suddenly looked different. His expression softened, almost imperceptibly. The fire in his eyes didn't go out, but it changed, becoming something calmer, more thoughtful. It was a strategic calm, a quiet shift that caught everyone off guard. He paused, his gaze fixed on the soldier. The soldier's hand finally reached its destination, a wobbly but clear salute. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. The boisterous crowd, which had been buzzing with energy, fell completely quiet. Every single person in that hall seemed to hold their breath, waiting. The air crackled with a mix of anticipation, confusion, and a strange kind of reverence. No one moved. No one spoke. It was like time itself had stopped. In that moment, the fight transcended the ring. What would Muhammad Ali do next? The entire room, and everyone watching, waited for his next move. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. To understand that moment, you have to go back to a different America, a country pulled in two directions. It was the 1960s and early 70s, a time when the Vietnam War was tearing families and communities apart. Patriotism was a big deal, almost a religion for many. Flags flew everywhere, and support for the troops was seen as a duty. But underneath that, a powerful counterculture was growing. Young people questioned everything, especially the war. They marched, they protested, and they challenged the old ways of thinking. The nightly news showed images of jungles and battlefields, of young American soldiers fighting a war many didn't understand. Back home, that war created a huge crack in society. On one side, you had people who believed America was fighting for freedom, that it was a necessary stand against communism. They saw soldiers as heroes, and anyone who questioned the war as unpatriotic, maybe even a traitor. On the other side, You had the anti-war movement, a diverse group of students, artists, and activists who saw the war as a moral disaster, a waste of young lives. They argued for peace, for an end to the fighting, and they often clashed with those who supported the war. Right in the middle of all this social upheaval was Muhammad Ali. He had risen to fame as Cassius Clay, a charismatic and incredibly skilled boxer from Louisville, Kentucky. He was fast, he was powerful, and he wasn't afraid to brag about it. He called himself the greatest, and he had the talent to back it up. His early life in Louisville, like for many Black Americans at the time, was shaped by segregation and racial injustice. His family instilled strong values in him, values that would later guide his biggest decisions. He saw firsthand the struggles and the fight for civil rights. When he joined the Nation of Islam and changed his name to Muhammad Ali, it was a bold statement, a rejection of his slave name, and an embrace of his new identity. But his biggest challenge, the one that truly defined him outside the boxing ring, came when he was drafted into the military. He refused to serve, stating it went against his religious beliefs. He famously said, "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong." That decision, that one simple statement, blew up in his face. For many, especially those who supported the war, it was an unforgivable act. How could a national hero, a symbol of American strength, refuse to fight for his country? They called him a draft dodger, a coward. His stance wasn't just about refusing military service. It was a public challenge to the very idea of American exceptionalism and the government's foreign policy. It was a time when questioning authority was seen as dangerous, and Ali, with his huge platform, was doing just that. His persona as the greatest, which he had so carefully built, suddenly collided head-on with the national expectation of military service. The fame that had made him a household name now made him a lightning rod for controversy. You could see the tension building in the public reaction. Sports writers who once praised him now condemned him. Fans who cheered his victories now booed his name. There were subtle signs everywhere, murmurs in crowds, angry letters to newspapers, and the quiet disapproval of people who felt he had let them down. It was clear that his choice had put him on a collision course with a deeply divided nation, setting the stage for years of struggle and conflict. That decision, to refuse the draft, didn't just cause a stir, it tore his world apart. The immediate fallout was brutal. The boxing commissions, under immense public and political pressure, moved swiftly. Within days, Muhammad Ali was stripped of his heavyweight title, the very belt he had fought so hard to win and defend. It wasn't just a title. It was his livelihood, his identity. They took away his boxing license in every state, effectively banning him from the sport he dominated. Imagine being at the top of your game, the undisputed champion, and then, overnight, having everything taken away. Not because you lost a fight, but because of what you believed. The financial ruin hit hard. He had been a top earner, but with no license, there were no fights, no prize money. The endorsements dried up almost instantly. Companies that had once clamored for his image now ran from him, fearing public backlash. He went from being a global icon to a pariah in his own country. This wasn't just about losing money. It was about losing options, losing his ability to provide for his family, and losing the platform that came with his athletic success. Former allies, people who had been close to him, promoters, trainers, even some friends, started to distance themselves. The pressure was too great. It was a time when standing with Ali meant risking your own career, your own reputation. Promises of support, of loyalty, evaporated like mist. He found himself increasingly isolated, surrounded by a smaller and smaller circle of people who truly stood by him. It highlighted the conditional nature of fame and friendship in such politically charged times. The societal abuse was relentless. He was publicly ridiculed, called names, and his patriotism questioned daily. Newspapers and television commentators, once full of praise, now painted him as a villain, a symbol of everything that was wrong with the anti-war movement. There were boycotts of his few remaining public appearances, and he faced constant legal battles, fighting charges of draft evasion. Every step he took, every word he spoke, was scrutinized and twisted. He couldn't even leave the country easily. His passport was taken away. For a man who had traveled the world, who had transcended borders with his talent and charisma, being confined within the very nation that condemned him was a special kind of torment. He was a prisoner of his principles, a champion locked out of his own arena. The emotional toll must have been immense. To go from being celebrated to being ostracized, to have his integrity questioned at every turn, to be denied the right to practice his craft, it was a systematic dismantling of his life. Yet, through it all, he held firm to his convictions. He continued to speak out, to articulate his reasons, even when it meant more condemnation. This wasn't just stubbornness, it was a deep-seated belief in what was right, a principle he valued more than his career or his freedom. This period, these years of struggle, humiliation, and financial hardship, weren't just a detour in his life. They were central to who he became. The moment we saw at the beginning, when he stopped mid-speech, wasn't an isolated event. It was the culmination of all these years, all these battles. It was the weight of those experiences, the memory of those subtle humiliations and outright abuses that shaped his reaction. His unwavering principles had come at a steep price, a price paid in public scorn and personal sacrifice, all against a hostile backdrop that tested his resolve every single day. He had endured so much, and that endurance had forged a strength far beyond what he displayed in the boxing ring. The tensions surrounding Ali's refusal to fight in Vietnam and the war itself reached a boiling point. It felt like the whole country was screaming, tearing itself apart. You couldn't turn on the television or open a newspaper without seeing arguments, protests, and outrage. People were either fiercely patriotic, waving flags and demanding loyalty, or they were burning draft cards and marching in the streets, fed up with the senseless deaths. There was no middle ground. Not really. Every conversation felt like walking on eggshells, ready to explode into a shouting match. Government officials, of course, piled on the pressure. They saw Ali as a dangerous symbol, someone who could sway young men away from their duty. They wanted to make an example of him. There were whispers, threats, and public statements designed to undermine his credibility. They tried to frame his religious beliefs as a convenient excuse, not as a deeply held conviction. It was a constant barrage from powerful institutions designed to break his spirit and force him to conform. Even within his own community, things weren't simple. While many Black Americans supported his stand against a war they felt disproportionately affected them, others struggled with it. Some felt he should serve, proving Black loyalty to the nation, especially after the civil rights movement had fought so hard for equality. There was a quiet judgment from some, a sense that he was making things harder for everyone. This internal conflict, the lack of universal support even from those he expected it from, added another layer to his burden. It wasn't just white America he had to convince. It was his own people, too. Ali's emotional state during these years must have been near its breaking point. Imagine carrying the weight of a nation's anger, the scorn of the media, and the subtle doubts of your own community. He was a young man, still in his prime, but he was isolated, stripped of his livelihood, and constantly under attack. He grappled with the enormity of his choices, knowing that every decision he made had huge consequences, not just for himself, but for countless others who looked up to him. The isolation was immense. He had always been surrounded by people, by adoring fans, by his entourage. Now, the crowds were often hostile, and his inner circle had shrunk dramatically. The environment around him only reinforced this psychological burden. The images were everywhere. Thousands of young people marching for peace, clashing with police. News reports detailing the rising casualty counts in Vietnam, the body bags arriving home. The heavy, humid air of a deeply divided nation, thick with tension and suspicion. It was a time of immense social upheaval, and Ali was right in the middle of it, a lightning rod for all the anger and frustration. Every day felt like a battle, even when he wasn't in the ring. The constant scrutiny intensified that feeling of being an outsider. Every word he spoke, every move he made, was dissected and criticized. He couldn't just be a boxer or a man. He was a symbol, and symbols are rarely allowed to be complex or flawed. He was either a hero or a traitor, with no room in between. This relentless pressure created a palpable sense of unease, a constant conflict that gnawed at him. He had to be strong, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally, to withstand such an onslaught. It was a period that truly tested his resolve, pushing him to his limits and showing the world the true depth of his convictions. He held firm, despite everything. He held firm, despite everything. Now, back in that crowded hall, the years of struggle, the public scorn, the personal cost, all seemed to coalesce into this single, charged moment. Ali had been mid-sentence, his voice booming, when he saw him. The soldier in the wheelchair, a man whose body bore the brutal scars of the war Ali had so vehemently opposed. This was no abstract concept of conflict. This was the raw, undeniable reality. And then, the salute. It wasn't angry. It wasn't a challenge. It was a gesture of respect. This act, so simple yet so profound, hit Ali like a punch he hadn't seen coming. It was a revelation. For so long he had viewed the war, and, by extension, those who fought in it, through the lens of a principled stand against political injustice. He saw the system, the government, the machine that sent young men to die. He saw the opposition, the enemy, in a broader sense. But this soldier, with his quiet dignity and shattered body, was none of those things. He was a man, a human being, who had endured unimaginable suffering. He wasn't a faceless uniform. He was a person, offering respect to another person. This single gesture shattered Ali's preconceived notions. It wasn't about defiance or aggression in this moment. It was about shared humanity, about a silent acknowledgement of courage, perhaps even a mutual understanding of sacrifice, albeit for different causes. The soldier wasn't an antagonist. He was a victim of the very system Ali fought against. Yet he extended a hand, or rather, a salute, across the divide. It forced Ali to confront a deeper truth about humanity and shared suffering that went beyond political statements and ideological battles. For years, Ali had been locked in a pattern of viewing the world through conflict and opposition. It was him against the government, him against the media, him against the established order. His internal narrative had been one of constant struggle, a fight for justice and principle. But this soldier's salute cut through all of that. It wasn't an attack, it was a bridge. It wasn't an argument, it was an olive branch. It made Ali realize that his words and actions had an impact far beyond the political arena. They reached individuals, people who had their own stories, their own pains, their own reasons for being where they were. This discovery changed everything for him in that instant. It wasn't a sudden change of mind about the war itself, but a profound shift in how he perceived the people caught within its orbit. He wasn't just fighting an abstract concept. He was impacting lives, and those lives, like this soldier's, held immense value and deserved respect, regardless of their role in the larger conflict. The immediate, visceral reaction that followed was not just impactful, but emotionally coherent with the man he truly was beneath the bravado and the political stances. It was the heart of Muhammad Ali, the compassionate, empathetic man, breaking through the hardened shell of the activist and the fighter. He saw the man, not the uniform, and in that moment, the world shifted on its axis for him. The room was completely silent. Ali, usually so active, so loud, stood frozen for a beat, his eyes locked on the soldier. Then, slowly, deliberately, he moved. He didn't say another word into the microphone. Instead, he walked to the edge of the stage, his gaze never leaving the man in the wheelchair. The crowd held its breath, leaning forward, unsure what would happen next. Ali stepped down from the stage, moving with a quiet grace that was different from his boxing swagger. He walked straight to the soldier, who was still holding his saluting hand up, his face a mixture of pain and unwavering respect. When Ali reached him, he didn't speak. He simply knelt down eye level with the soldier. Then, with a tenderness that surprised everyone, even those who knew him well, he gently took the soldier's saluting hand, lowered it, and then pulled the man into a tight, heartfelt embrace. It wasn't a quick hug. It was a long, silent hold that spoke volumes. The soldier, at first stiff, slowly relaxed into the embrace, his head resting on Ali's shoulder. A ripple went through the audience. Some people gasped softly. Others started to cry, tears streaming down their faces. There were no cheers, no shouts, just the sound of quiet sniffles, and the collective exhale of a room that had been holding its breath for too long. Even the few who had come to heckle, those who still harbored deep resentment for Ali's anti-war stance, were silenced. Their anger seemed to melt away in the face of such raw, unscripted humanity. In that moment, all the political divisions, all the arguments, all the years of conflict seemed to fade, replaced by a shared recognition of suffering and respect. Ali finally pulled back, but he kept a hand on the soldier's shoulder, looking him directly in the eyes. He said something softly that no one else could hear, a private exchange between two men who had, in their own ways, fought their own battles. The soldier nodded, a small, weary smile touching his lips. It was a gesture of compassion that transcended everything. It wasn't about who was right or wrong about the war, but about acknowledging the shared human experience, the sacrifices made, and the pain endured. This act, more than any speech or public statement, solidified Ali's legacy. It showed the world that beneath the bravado and the controversial opinions was a man of profound empathy, a champion who understood that the greatest fights were sometimes won, not with fists, but with heart. His earlier struggles, the loss of his title, the public ridicule, none of it was erased, but it was reframed. It highlighted his unwavering principles and, just as importantly, his capacity for connection and understanding. He proved that true courage, wasn't just about standing up for what you believe in, but also about reaching across divides, about seeing the person behind the uniform, behind the differing viewpoint. The story of Muhammad Ali isn't just about boxing. It's about the true meaning of courage, about reconciliation, and about the incredible power of a single act to bridge immense divides. He was a man who challenged the world, and, in doing so, ultimately taught us how to embrace it, even its most broken parts. His life, full of struggle and triumph, ended with a quiet understanding that lasting impact comes from both conviction and compassion. It left everyone in that room, and indeed, everyone who heard the story, in thoughtful silence, contemplating the simple, profound truth of humanity.